Khari, what's going on, man?
Nothing much, Kevin. I appreciate being on this show. Congratulations too. I heard that you had a addition to the family, so really great.
We did, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, baby Theo is doing well. He's growing and man, he's eating a ton, which is great every day. Those babies are just nonstop, but it's been fun. I'm excited to talk to you, Kari, because from what I understand, I know you have 25 plus years of experience in public and government service. And before we started recording, we briefly talked about how you grew up, I mean, New York through and through. I mean, the borough that you grew up in, you didn't leave, you're still there, and you've been serving the people. And so tell us a little bit about, your background and what inspired this passion and where you're at today as head of corporate relations at Ayr Wellness.
So my mother told me, I should work for a local elected official. I was like, no, I don't want to do that, but I could have used the money. Started with who now a gentleman named Nick Perry, who's now the U.S. ambassador to Jamaica. So proud to know an ambassador, and literally worked for him. Worked for U.S. congressmen. Worked to the governor of the state of New York. And my life in politics really showed me how to serve people. And most recently, I was the head of external affairs for a hospital in Brooklyn, and then decided to run for Brooklyn Borough President in 2021. And obviously, I didn't win because I wouldn't be here, but it kind of really just continued to show me what was important for our communities. And literally trying to figure out what my next steps were, wondering if I was going to work for the current mayor, do something more in not for profit. I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was doing some consulting with Ayr and asked me if I'd be interested in cannabis. And again, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. But interestingly enough, my wife has been, a true advocate in cannabis for a long time. Grew up in the culture, and she was like, "Why don't you just try it? The industry is moving. They could probably really use someone like you." And so I tried it, and I'm very happy that I've tried it. Been working with Ayr since November 2021, and have really found a real place of doing the work that I like to do for community, but doing it through a cannabis lens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do look forward to learning more about your current role and what you're focused on, especially from a corporate relations standpoint. But let's back it up. And you talked about, your initial footing into the political landscape. How old were you at that time?
1997, maybe he was 20 something years old. Yeah, about 20. I don't even know the maths, right? So I'm going to be 50 this year. Don't tell anyone. But yeah, I was probably literally just turning 28, 27, 28.
So still super young, super fresh, in your professional career. And I can't imagine. I mean, the learning experiences that you got firsthand from, like you mentioned, these U.S. congressmen, I mean, state senators who are now ambassadors. What were some of the key takeaways, having a front row seat in the political environment, especially, within in Washington, D.C.? What was your kind of perspective and what did you take away from that?
Yeah, I mean, the greatest thing that I tell first people that depends on who you work for, right? I mean, and it doesn't matter what the party, the gender, or color. If you work for an elected official who's really about their constituents and putting people first, it's probably the most rewarding job that you have. I remember a story that I got a phone call from a lady who had her Con Edison bill. So that's our electric company here in New York. Her Con Edison bill was cut because of non-payment, and she was a senior and didn't see the mail. And she called the office and she was frantic. And instinctively, I was like, I hang up. I'll call you right back. And I called Con Ed, and I was just like, look, she's a senior. She didn't see the bill. I'm calling on behalf of the representative. What could we do for her? And they literally came back on the phone and was like, please tell the representative we appreciate his advocacy. We'll turn her lights back on and give her a payment plan so she can get through. And then that's where I got to see the power of advocacy and the power of just doing right by people. And I've been blessed to work for a lot of individuals, even including Ayr at this point, that really believes in putting people first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to wrap up, your prior experience, which led you to where you're at today, Khari, tell me, like, I mean, there's no doubt that it's the most rewarding position to be in, probably, when you're firsthand public serving the public and you're seeing how they're benefiting from your services or what you're providing. There's also a dark side to politics, right? And it can get ugly sometimes. So tell us a little bit about how maybe the landscape has evolved and changed and maybe gotten worse or maybe gotten better from your perspective in the 25 years that you worked in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say better or worse. I think that ideologies change. The way we go about respecting one another has changed. I've sat in the chamber where, Republicans and Democrats, black and white men, black and white women would argue over a bill, argue over like some type of need for what they believed was best for their communities. And then when they went into the lounge, they shook hands and it was a respectful place. I think the politics that we've seen now has lost that human side to it. And I think that the issues still haven't changed. We're still talking about poverty. We're still talking about criminal justice. We're still talking about taxes. But I think that the way we go about it has changed in the fact that the institutions, the reason why you got elected is because folks feel that you have a human understanding. And so, I think that's my most disappointing thing looking at this current, political landscape and how folks just can't get along, or how folks are tweeting about each other and disrespecting each other's cultures and backgrounds rather than really just working. And I mean, I think the situation that happened in Memphis was a true reality to that. And it really hurts, because then the people who really do get hurt are the folks who vote you in. So, it's not much has changed. There's still some good, and there's a lot of bad, and there's a lot of good, and there's some bad. But it's a balance of life. I think life, you go through those kind of things. But I guess the lack of respect for one another is what's most disappointing for me now.
Yeah, you're reinforcing that from my perspective as well. I mean, um in college, I was in the program of journalism at American University, and I had buddies that were, interning with Capitol elected officials on Capitol Hill, and even the old school reporters that I would talk to in the DC area said the same thing. They're echoing what you're saying, and that is how the respect, they're just reaching across the aisle. Like, one of them, I forget the gentleman's name, but he mentioned that he had been covering DC politics for over like 30 years, and when he first started, Republicans and Democrats would go to lunch together or, have dinner together after arguing or debating, more, probably debating is the right word, during that time in the House and the Senate. But, they still had that common respect for each other. They still go out to dinner, treat each other with respect as a human. And it's unfortunate we've lost that. We hope that we get back to that with the up and coming generations. But
Mm-hmm.
well, talk to me, you've been obviously focused on strengthening communities. You've touched on that, advocating and addressing racial, health and civic disparities. And then you took a chance with cannabis, right? So I would imagine in that transition, in that process, there was an easy kind of path, because I mean, think about, all the people that have been disenfranchised by the plan, particularly people of color. So was that something that, was something of interest to you as you entered the space?
Yeah, I mean, really, that's the reason why I even said yes to it. Like I said, when my wife put it in the perspective of, you're basically advocating for a lot of folks who can't advocate, or you're dealing with years of prohibition, years of ill treatment. And I'll take it one step further. In New York, we have something that we call the social determinants of health, right? And that's just the lack of creating accessible health care that ends up affecting accessible jobs and housing. And so in New York, we list all of these things under the social determinants of health. And here we have a plant that heals, right? A plant that takes away aches and pains and solves issues of hunger and all of the wonderful things that cannabis does. But yet, communities of color who've been disenfranchised by this don't have access to it. Modern day or post media look at villainized it. And so you really tend to understand that communities who are not at the top of the food chain tend to lose out, even though folks who are at the top of the food chain make the money. And so I found a very interesting balance of working for people, supporting people, educating people, using this cannabis, this billion-dollar industry to now serve people in a way that would be helpful to them. So everything from the medicinal side, from the educational side, from the social justice side, I've been given a blank canvas, not a blank check. I always quote our chairman of the board for saying that, but a blank canvas to really create a place where folks feel that it belongs to them, right? If you believe in your planet Earth and this is produced by the planet Earth, it belongs to you. And so
Mhm.
these are the things that I get to do on a daily basis, and it's probably more rewarding than a lot of stuff I've done throughout my years in politics.
That's a great way to put it, a blank canvas. I mean, I've had guests on repeatedly who talk about, they're in the HR department or the marketing team, and how, to your point, there's this blank canvas of like, hey, we can do things differently, right? We can implement a different culture, or we can treat employees a different way than we have before, or even our marketing style and message can be different than traditional industries. And so, I mean, how are you going about that as head of corporate relations at Ayr? I mean, it seems like they're really open to having you come in and, kind of have that autonomy.
Yeah, I mean, again, it just comes down to the human factor, Kevin. It's like, when I started, they were like, "Are you really gonna fly to every community and figure out what they need?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, I can't turn around and say, "Oh, Nevada needs this," or Massachusetts needs this, without going in there, talking to the people. I could read all about it, but it's different when you shake the hands of an elected official. You shake the hand of somebody who just got out of jail or wants to be expunged. And then you start to understand, how do we build this portfolio? And then on top of that, you speak to the employees, the people that work in the community every day, the people whose families are affected, good and bad, by this. Like, I got a job so I could support my family. Oh, someone in my family got arrested for it and can't get a job. So there's so many different things that you learn by just talking to people. And I love to talk. Lord knows I love to talk, but it was more rewarding going to these different states and saying, well, what would be beneficial for you? And that's part of how we started our Changing Legacies program, because I went and spoke to folks who've been like, look, I got arrested for this, right? My husband's doing 8 years for less than an ounce. I can't feed my family. Like, how do we create a place where my husband can come home, or that my wife was able to get a job? And so, I went back into my political world, and I'm like, wow, we need to really look at the social justice side of it. And so when I started, last February, not this most 2022 February, we did a corporate wide expungement event, 5 states. We expunged as many people as showed up, and this year we did it again. And it's really freeing people in a way that I still get teary about it. That, a gentleman came up to me in New York last year and said, "You've taken paper handcuffs off of me." And we've reused and reused that quote, because no one's ever realized that, yeah, you may be out of jail, you may be out of the metal bars, but you can't get a job, you can't get health care, and that becomes paper handcuffs. And so he's like, "You didn't have to do this, and thank you." And he's like, "Thank your company, and thank you for just caring." And so that's the human factor that I think that, I'm happy we bring to the table.
Yeah. Khari, you're in a unique position because you have so much experience and expertise on the political side, and now you've entered on the legal corporate cannabis side, right, as a decision maker, um, to change and enact change within. But you can reach across the aisle. I feel like you can speak the language of some of these politicians. So I guess my question to you is, how has your message been received? You talked about how you're visiting all these different states and cities to see firsthand the needs of the people and then of the community. So how are the elected officials in these local areas responding to your message?
I mean, the response has been overwhelmingly positive, right? Because again, elected officials sit in these seats because of the people who elect them. And, you may have one group that doesn't want to deal with cannabis, doesn't want to understand what's going on. And that elected official then resonates that message. So then my role is to sit her down and say, hey, you know what? Can we talk about what this plant does? And then have them be the advocates to go back to the community. Or can I do a town hall around, the health benefits of this? Or how does opioids or, ibuprofen affect a body versus cannabis? And then you go into some other communities that they welcome you. They welcome the opportunity to create an economic engine. They welcome the opportunity because they've seen so many of their community locked up for this, and now they want to be able to reap the rewards of it. And so I think, again, it comes down to individuals, but from a political standpoint, I think that the response from their community is the response you get from them, right? Because technically, if I won and I had a bunch of folks in Coney Island telling me they didn't want something, that's who I listen to, whether or not I feel the same way or not about it. And what I've respected a lot of these elected officials, they look at their community, how their community wants to respond to it, and they've responded in kind.
That's encouraging to hear. And I mean, you touched on a lot of the value add that cannabis legalization brings. And I mean, we're armed with ammo when it comes to education and information, right? For a politician or elected official that may not understand the benefits from an environmental, medicinal or industrial standpoint, but there's tons. I mean, the benefits are endless. And so it's good to hear that message is being received. And, we do see politicians taking action or proposing bills that address some of the, inequality, or again, addressing the disenfranchised communities. But in your view, what needs to be done to truly, impact or make an impact for these communities that have been hit with prohibition and affected?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we need to be intentional, right? And coming from where I've come from, it's a little easier to be intentional. It's a little easier to say, okay, here I have this corporation who's made a ton of money on the things that people have been locked up for, and I have a CEO and I have a chairperson who believes in being intentional. John Sendelman, who's the chairman of the board, basically said, look, if we can give everybody the same starting point, I feel that we'll do away with a lot of the community's ills. And so I think really, what am I healing? What am I putting my money towards? What am I putting my advocacy towards? Right? Am I talking about it in its general sense, where an elected official may not feel that, who cares about, the health sides of it? Do I talk to elected officials who may be like, hey, I want to see the economic sides for my community and get people out of poverty? So again, like I said, I think communication is the biggest thing. And education is the second biggest thing. Like, you have to be able to really sit down and understand the needs, right? Because, when I was doing certain programs in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, Massachusetts has a housing issue. Pennsylvania has a food issue, right? And I couldn't just blanketly say, hey, Ayr's pillars are going to be, housing insecurity, where I leave out so many other people. And I think that we're all individuals. We all have our own likes and dislikes, but there are communities that have the same need for things. And I think that's part of the overall message, that your intention has to be genuine. Your intention has to be really specific to healing what you want to be healed. And for us, the biggest thing we hung our hat on early is just paying it forward, helping folks get started. You don't have to get a career in cannabis, but look, we're going to help you find a career once we help you get expunged. We're going to let you find housing, and use this economic engine, so to speak, to move that needle. And so it's been, I think it's more cool that I wasn't part of cannabis. I have all the culture around me, my wife to my colleagues, but I do think that, what, the fact that I didn't really come from a full culture cannabis world is like, I looked at it from a humanistic world that then led into cannabis.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's in most cases, it's advantageous to have people that are outside because they bring certain skill sets to the table. I know that there's this ongoing battle of, the legacy farmer or operator versus the new suits that are coming in. But um, in most cases, it's good for everyone because again, there's different skills that are brought to the table, and it only expands the reach and overall message of what the industry is trying to get across. So, that's great.
And I don't
Ta-
have a
ta-
bias. I really, I like, there's no bias to just wanting people to be okay. So whether it's suits, whether it's legacy, the reality of it is that I really don't have a bias when I walk into these rooms. And I've been yelled at by legacy folks, called me a sellout, and I've been like, I'm not business enough by some other folks in suits. But I run my balance and I run my line, and I think that's the cool thing.
Yeah, and you can't please everyone. So
Right.
it's good that you draw that line and you have that balance because it's important to be you at the end of the day too, right? I mean, you can't surrender your values and what you're mission and passionate about. So um well, tell me a little more about Ayr's social impact initiatives. I think you touched on one of them, but there's the other one, Force for Good initiative.
Yeah, so everything that we do from a CSR and now a corporate standpoint is really making sure that Ayr is a force for good, right? When we go into a community, make sure we hire from the community because in the end, if you're hiring from the community, you're creating an economic engine in that community. People are able to go shopping, people are able to go pay their rent, and so therefore we always want to make sure when we go into a community that that's the first thing that we do. The other part of it too, like I said, is the social justice aspect of it. Creating these expungement events to give people an opportunity to get their lives back, to change the legacies of what we were dealing with during prohibition. One of our other pillars is just seeds to success, right? And that's the thing that we just talked about. Taking someone from the legacy world, creating an accelerator program to support their mission, creating some type of pathway for them to either be the head of CSR like me, or for them to find a pathway through something ancillary in cannabis, or within cannabis itself, being a worker or like an executive. And so we really start every day with a force for good. Like there's no real specific one. It's doing right by people. It's paying it forward and opening up opportunities for folks. So force for good is the overall moniker of the mission that I was told to fulfill.
Well, those programs that you touched on within the overall Force for Good initiative at Ayr is awesome. And the one I particularly like is that those expungement events that you talked about. Um, I mean, is there a number? How many people have been expunged participating, or how many events have you hosted?
Yeah. So when I started, so November 2021, I started. We did our first big one February. And that one, I knew I don't want to. I don't have the data in front of me, so forgive me. So I don't want to overshoot. But we did 5 states, and we walked away expunging over 400 records.
Wow.
And the reason why that was good is because there's a distrust when people do expungement events, right? You'll do this big expungement event, and 3 people will show up because no one really believes that you're going to take the time to expunge them. This year, I think we almost doubled that. I think we're somewhere around a 700 range of folks that we touched, but we also did some smaller ones in Connecticut. We did one in Arizona. We did a couple in Jersey. Yeah, on 420, rather than celebrating the full day of cannabis, what we were doing in Rochester, New York, is we decided to do an expungement event and celebrate cannabis in a way by freeing people on this holiday. And those numbers I could tell you, we expunged over 175 people, over 220 showed up. It was a
Wow.
full relationship between the former mayor of Rochester, the current mayor of Rochester, the state senator. It was something to behold personally because the entire community came out, but they came out with the intentions of starting their lives over. And so to date, that is the most successful single day expungement that we've had so far.
That's very impressive, man. Congratulations on that. That's great. I
Thank
mean,
you.
it's overall good, and I mean, it's in a way, I mean, not in a way, it is life changing, right? Because of the people who have suffered for so long with that earmark, that asterisk on their record, or if they've been locked up. I mean, it's hard to get a job at that point or to just kind of live a normal life. And you mentioned that within that program there is like also guidance and help to kind of get them placed in certain jobs, even if it's outside of cannabis. Is that correct?
Yeah. So one of the unique things that we realized from just watching other expungement events, folks come in, the paper handcuffs are gone, go about your business. So you have folks who are now free. I always go back to the Shawshank Redemption movie, right? He's free, but now what's the next step? And so what we realize is that when our partners, who are amazing, right? Blaze Responsibly, Mass Cultivated Ed, Cannabis Noir, community alternatives, like our partners have been so amazing. So when we start the expungement event, you go through it, you come in, you register. While you're waiting for the lawyer to call you, you can go around the different vendor tables where we have everything from housing to veteran support to food programs. You go upstairs, and in Jersey is very unique. You can get expunged pretty much on the spot. Some other states it takes more paperwork. But what we do after that is when you're done, we require you now to go talk to these vendors. So do you need health care? Do you need those things? So we don't leave you on your own. We make sure that you have something tangible to walk out with, along with the fact that you're starting your life over. And it's been very successful because, like I said, the community, the elected officials, the buy-in is real. Like folks come out to support. I mean, we've had so many vendors just show up because, look, I want to help this person out. I want to be there to see what we can do. And I give our Mass Cultivate Ed, one of our partners in Massachusetts, a big props because they've been doing this for a while and they've kind of like set the bar so that we knew how to handle it. And they were the ones that made sure they always had the services there. And so we've just duplicated that throughout.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, and it just shows that you're building trust, right? I mean, because you mentioned earlier these events before there'd be little to no people showing up because they just didn't believe that it would happen or people would take the time to actually care. So it's great that not only is Ayr leading the charge, but also like you said, other vendors are jumping on board, or they've been for a while, but y'all are just now starting to collaborate and really blow it out, which is amazing. So kudos to you on that. And I also want to just ask you, or we talked about it before we started recording. Like it's been a busy week, right? I mean, 420 MJ
Yeah.
Unpacked this week. Are y'all do you have any participation in the MJ Unpacked event? Like what's your role, if anything? And yeah, tell us about what you're working on.
Yeah, I am. I'm a guest panelist on Friday, which I'm always proud to talk about this stuff. And it feels good, like I said, being a non-cannabis guy, that folks actually want to listen to me. So I said I've been looking forward to our interview for a while because you're the shit. Like getting on
Thanks,
your
man.
getting on your Zoom is a big deal to me. So
Appreciate that.
the no, definitely, man. And again, you as some being somebody outside, you learn and you study, and you know who are the folks that are respected and do the work. So kudos to you on that. And my panel is being how to be a good neighbor. And from an MSO standpoint, right? Because you walk in the room, it's oh, here comes the MSO, or somebody has their hand out, hey, I need money from the MSO. And so we're basically just having a real open discussion on what it is to be a good neighbor. How do you support communities and folks in that way, and how to get out of their way. And I'm very proud to have been invited to that because I think we've built a real cachet of people first and being a force for good. So that's my MJ Unpacked. I get to do that on Friday, but again, I'm back up in Rochester on Wednesday, so that's another cool thing.
It never ends, man. No, I hear it. And that sounds like a really interesting topic. I mean, um, I've learned that lesson moving into a home, like becoming a homeowner and living in a neighborhood like outside of the city. It's important, like to know who your neighbors are, and we have great neighbors around us, and just to kind of see the support from them firsthand, like having a young baby, and all that kind of stuff. So I know that is outside of we're talking about the cannabis community, but it translates, right? I mean, it's the same principle, same concept. So If there's a replay, I'd love to check it out. I don't know if they're recording it or not, but
Yeah,
unfortunately, I
I'll
won't be
find
here.
out. I mean, I'm excited and nervous at the same time, but it's a real appropriate topic. And I had fun early in the year at this Trailblaze event as well. Just be able to get the message out, right? You know, I
Right.
always talk about embarrassing folks to doing the right thing, and I think that the more that we get to talk about it, the more that your presence grows in this place and the things that you're doing, folks are going to get that chance because a lot of folks aren't going to run into me on the street, you know, unless by accident. It's not like they're going to recognize me. So by being on your Zoom and these things, it creates a real understanding for the industry.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I mean that's my overall goal, and having experts on you like you on who are, I mean, on the front lines firsthand and really advocating for change and making it happen is what I love to do and talk about. So, Khari, I really appreciate you coming on, man. I want to leave the floor to you before we go. Is there anything that we didn't touch on or that you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
I mean, really just really watch the growth of Ayr. You know, force for good is not just a saying, it's really what every person down to the folks who clip the leaves and sweep up are really about. And I think overall the culture of cannabis is a real peaceful place where people do respect and love each other. And I'm just happy to be a part of this journey.
Absolutely, my man. And I think I speak for a lot of people when I say we're happy that you're on the journey with us because we need those savvy people on the inside, especially within the political realm. And you have that expertise and knowledge. So keep up the great work and look forward to having you back on, man, as things progress. And, once New York really takes off in terms of its legal cannabis sales. So, yeah, let's do it again.
Thank you. It was an honor, and I really appreciate you, my friend.
Of course. Thank you. And I appreciate you and I appreciate everybody for listening. Until next time. Bye.